Okay, here we are on the seventh day of the month of Tishrei. In Hayom Yom, we are exploring, elaborating on the Inyan of Tshuva. Remember, it's spelled with Tav Shin and Vav and Hey, etc. And Rav Zusha of Anapali gave us there's a word for this, where you take each letter of the word and assign a meaning to it. There's a word for this in English. Anagram? I'm not sure, I don't think so, but something like that. And we're on the letter Shin. The letter Shin. Excuse me. No, we're on the letter Beis. Teshuvah. The Beis in Teshuvah. So the Beis in Teshuvah, Beis, he says, we'll align that with a pasuk called Bechol derechecha de'ehu. Beis. Bechol derechecha de'ehu. It's a pasuk. In all of your ways, you should know God. And he says, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains it like this. A person who sets his heart and mind to observe all that happens to him and around him, in every place you walk, in everything you see, in everything you touch, in everything you feel, and you set your heart to observe in that godliness in everything, will perceive godliness tangibly, in evidence, as the Mittler Rebbe pointed out. Men of affairs, meaning businessmen, people in the marketplace, people who go to work, have an advantage over secluded scholars. This is from the Mittler Rebbe. And that the former, people who are involved in the marketplace, involved in the world, can witness actual manifestations of godliness. Hashgacha pratis. Things that happen. Whoa, how did that happen? Where did that come from? That you can experience if you're involved in things. And this form of the service of Shuva comes from one's perceiving, as he says, hashgacha pratis. Bechol derechecha. That's the Beis, Teshuvah, the Beis. Bechol derechecha. Hashgacha pratis is available to us who are primarily, most of us, not scholars sitting in a studying all day, but living real life, where Hashgacha pratis appears. Okay, that's the Beis in Teshuvah. Now we go into our Tanya. Lessons in Tanya. We are in the middle of chapter 20 in Lessons in Tanya. In the Igeres HaKodesh, chapter, the 20th letter in the Holy Letters, the section of this which is called Igeres HaKodesh, Holy Letters. And in Lessons in Tanya, this little book, it's on page 372, Zayin Tishrei. And here in Likutei Amorim, it is in the little, on page Kof Lamed, opposite 258. You have to count down from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines down. The line begins with bittul. And it starts, if you're counting bittul, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth word over is ach. However, the souls of angels. It's worth remarking, I think, that in the English translation over here, the compiler lets us know that this particular letter, which is letter 20, is probably the most difficult, and he says so, a letter in all of Tanya. And it's written in a manner that's not written anywhere else in Tanya, meaning it takes the root vocabulary of Kabbalah and attaches meaning to it that's meant to give us an understanding of how essence of God penetrates every little thing. But it's doing so in a very detailed manner, the detailed manner of how the Ephes HaMuchlat, which is called the absolute nothing, which is, of course, the primordial everything in which nothing has yet been so-called carved out or dropped out or contracted out, how the primordial everything goes through its stages of transition, although even that's a metaphor because God never changes, but how the Kabbalah has given us the ability to understand how that which is allness and nothing gets to substantial something. This is what's being discussed, all for the purpose of infusing us with a awareness of how every single thing we do, every single situation we are in, and every single thing we touch and feel contains the essence of God. And those things which are called out in the Torah to be what we call mitzvahs, as the Rebbe said over and over again, mitzvah is Lashon, is the language of tzavta vechibor, connecting us with God. Those things which are called out in the Torah to be mitzvahs, those physical things, actions, right? Those speech things, the way you speak, davening particularly, and the things you think, and learning Torah, how they are containers for essence of God. And therefore, engaging with them, the material, the speech and the mind of Torah, is the way by which godliness becomes evident in the world. It's digging away the layers and layers and layers. And what we're doing here is, yesterday and today's Tanya, is talking about the various levels, going from top to bottom. And we're at the level of neshamas of malachim, souls of angels, right? Angels are spiritual entities. They're entities. And this is something we should also take to heart, that from the primordial nothing, there emerges from that primordial no-thing space, first, layers and layers of spiritual things, which we call the worlds of Atzilus, the world of Bria, the world of Yetzirah, and the spiritual realm of Asiya, the world we live in. And finally, that's manifest in this world, the world of Asiya, as physicality. Okay, so with that, let's proceed, and I'll do the best that I can to explain this. Neshamas HaMalachim, souls of angels. Remember, someone asked the question yesterday, what's the purpose? Main purpose of the angels are to provide an interface between the physical and the godly. They're messengers of Hashem. They bring the energetic of godliness down, down, down into the physicality. And then as we do mitzvahs and release the godliness which is in the physical, they bring that up. And that's what they're the intermediaries, creating a binding relationship between us and God in order to bring out the often spoken idea that what we do down here below, the arousal from below, creates an arousal from above. It's because there's not a gap between below and above. There's spiritual space between them, and the angels are carrying ladders. They're going up and down the ladders all the time, like the angels of Yaakov in the desert. Angels were descending, and one group of angels stopped. Then he went into Eretz Yisrael, and then the spirit goes up. And these angels, since they're entities, they have souls. They have bodies and souls. Their bodies are not physical, but they have bodies, shapes, so to speak, spiritual shapes. If you could take a white light and mold it into a shape, you get an angel. And they have souls. However, the souls of angels, how are they brought into being? So just like a child is brought into being by what's called a zivug. A zivug is a relationship of intimacy. Down here below, it's a physical intimacy, which gives birth to something else. So there are two levels of intimacy that are spoken about here. One is the zivug hanashikim, the zivug, the union at the level of kissing. Kissing is breath to breath. So angels are created, the neshamas of angels, they come into being from this kissing, so to speak, of godliness with an external spirit, which is externalized by God himself. And also the souls of a human being, and that comes from the intimacy that's metaphorically expressed as the intimacy of Zeir Anpin, that's the Zion in Zun, which is the midos from Chesed down to Yesod. They're called the masculine midos. They're the givers. And then the intimacy, the receiver, is called malchus, and that's the creative intimacy, analogous to the creation of a human being. So Adam comes from that, the human being comes from that kind of relationship in the godly realms, which starts in the world of Atzilus, koidim shiyordu l'biyah, in the world of Atzilus, before things descend down into the lower worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. So there, enim beklal yesh v'dover nifra b'fnei atzmo. There in the upper worlds, this energetic that will become ultimately manifest in the physical is not really something yet that we could say it's separated from him and is something that exists on its own. Elahein me'en bechinas elokus. These spiritual energies and these angels, which are so-called embodying these spiritual energies, they're me'en bechinas elokus. They're something like godliness itself. And their godliness, but b'tzimtzum otzum. Their godliness, but in a very contracted state. Okay, and hakelim. And then when they're in a contracted state, they're like vessels. So from here we learn, and Rabbi Rashaba elaborates on this, that the vessels are really, everything is really, as I said, ain't od milvado, there's nothing besides God. So everything is a condensed and more condensed version, if you could say such a thing, of godliness. And the most condensed are called the vessels. And the more rarefied are called the lights. And the lights and vessels get together so that the energy is now encompassed in something which can express the energy. And these are the 10 spheres of Yud Sephiros of Atzilus. That's where it first starts. Shehen b'chinas gavul. They represent a limited state which comes about al yidei tzimtzum or ha'en sof, through the contraction, condensation of the infinite light, which is the kav, the beam. So God takes his allness and he shrinks it. And the word in Kabbalah is he takes himself away. He takes his allness away and he shrinks it into this beam, which we call the kav. Hamalubish bin Reshashur and Ashana Shalahem, and that beam of light, which is godliness, is enclosed in the levels of the soul, the nefesh, ruach, and neshama, of these spiritual bodies and these spiritual worlds. And we'll say like the first Simpson, the first big contraction, the first big condensation, which created, now this is metaphorical, an empty space. We spoke about this yesterday. It's called siluk. God takes himself away. Or in the other language of Kabbalah, al-hatzad. He removes himself to the side. So that's called departure. He's not departed, but he's departed the experience of allness and singularity and created an opportunity for multiplicity to emerge. The Afghan, and even that even after he descended in the levels which we call neshama, ruach, and nefesh, in the world of Atzilus, la'olam hazeh, and this comes down into this physical world, and this condensated energy is embodied in the tzaddikim, and he said tzaddikim Rishonim. He particularly said the original tzaddikim. We're talking about Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc., and throughout the generations. So because this godliness is invested within them in tzaddikim, and as we learned in the first part of Tanya, it's an open, that tzaddik never has any even thought or even instinct to do anything that's not godly, because godliness is open and embodies him completely. So this, when it comes down into the tzaddik, and therefore tzaddikim are the level, a way of expressing what is a tzaddik. A tzaddik is someone whose essence and whose very being is never ever separated from godliness. Therefore, if anything comes their way which could impinge on that allness of godliness, they will depart. The shomas of tzaddikim will go back up. They can have nothing to do with anything negative. So they will depart b'terem yachdu, before that negativity has any opportunity to grasp them. The court of Lamer, he said, and it's close to say, meaning one could say, Shigam, that even the thousands and ten upon thousands of worlds, the Yatfu Galta the Arach Anpin, which rest in the skull of Arach Anpin. This is a Kabbalistic metaphor. The skull, of course, being the highest part of the body. The skull manifesting very little, right? It seems to be like I'm a skull, numbskull, right? That's what the word in English, a numbskull, because the skull shows very little. However, it encompasses the brain. So that's a metaphor for the Or Ein Sof that doesn't display any multiplicity or gradation or any kind of characteristics. That's the skull. And it's emblematic then of the Or we call the Or Makif, the all-encompassing light, and even deeper than that, before the light is even emanated. So therefore, it said that there are thousands and thousands of worlds that are resident in the skull. You don't see them, like you see nothing in the skull, but they're in a state of primordialness and potentiality. And then you have Zoh, which is the midos, which are measured and now come out into multiplicity. So Inin Olmin Mamish, they are like worlds. Mamish, Ke'en Hecholis de Atzilus, they're like the chambers of Atzilus. So, right, you have the skull, which is all-encompassing, and then you have parts of the brain, the right brain, the left brain, the posterior brain, and then coming down into all the various multiplicities. But it's all driven from the allness, which is ayin, the allness, which is primordial, no exposed thing. Okay, and it comes down into we broaden out that into houses. That's another metaphor. And the houses have rooms and chambers. And these are various forms of what we call the bechina of yesh, something substantial. Elaken neshamas hamalachim. But these tzaddikim, in these worlds, which are in a state of spiritual existence and not physical existence, they're like the neshamas of the angels. Shiyochim is even the shikim, who came out, as we said before, they came out as a result of the relationship which is called the relationship of kissing, breath to breath. V'nikra almin, and they're called worlds, the gabi b'kinis halgalta v'dikna, and they're called worlds, they're substantial, even though they're very unsubstantial, but in relation to the ultimate simplicity, which is atzmus itself, they are something. But the angels and the souls of Atzilus are not godliness mamish. Godliness has the ability to create something from nothing. Once a light is emerged from it, it has a potential to bring something into being. But that potential to create something from nothing is reserved for God himself. So the angels and the souls of Atzilus are not elokus mamish. They're not godliness itself, livra yesh me'ayin, to create something from nothing. Because they're already something which is an outcome of the creation of something from nothing. They're also as his language, they've come out in a state of separateness from the vessels, the lights in the vessels of the Yud Sephiros, of the 10 Sephiros. Shebehem meluvesh hakav. In other words, the angels are, we're looking at this now, and the souls as very lowly things compared to the light which is giving existence to them, which itself is a lowly thing compared to the Ein Sof itself at a level before any emanation. So they're relatively lowly things. Shebehen melubesh hakav, the kav, the beam of light, is enclosed in these souls, angels, and in the beings in Atzilus. And this is a light me'or ein sof, from the light which is the infinite light. Sha'or hu ke'en hamoyer. And they bear resemblance to it. In other words, the manifestation of light bears some resemblance to the source of the light. We have this, and it's brought in Chassidus, a firelight has a different characteristic than a flashlight, right? Or an electric light. So from this we see that's a poor but good metaphor for how what comes out from the light bears some relationship to the source from whence it came. So yes, these souls of Atzilus and these angels. They bear some resemblance, but they're just outcomes from something which is much deeper than they. And the expression is orkua enamor, because the light has some relationship and is something like the source of the light. And what is the source of the light? The source of the light, which is the only thing which can bring something into being from nothing, is mahusaviat smuso shell. It's the essence and the being of too many pages, shel hamatzil borachu, of the emanator himself. May he be blessed. Here's an expression to think about. God's essence is from himself. There is no predecessor to him. In the language of the Rambam, he is the kadmon, he is the primordial, she'en kadum mekedim, I'm not quoting exactly, there is no primordial which precedes him. He is that, he's the only thing whose existence is of itself. And from that comes every other existence. And no other existence has the power to create from itself. And he says, this primordiality of God is not like an effect which comes from some kind of cause, shekadmale, which preceded it. Chas v'sholom, God forbid. That's what we mean by he is eternal. Eternal doesn't mean he goes on forever. He's a thing which has existed forever, and nothing preceded him. Therefore, it's only in his power, the power of God himself, not from any light which comes from him, but it's only from the power of God himself, which is able to create something from nothing, from something which is absolutely nothing, he's the only thing that can create something from absolutely nothing, mamash. Without any predecessor cause, and not without any predecessor effect, he's kademis l'yesh hazeh. There's nothing which precedes this yeshusness. He is the true yesh. He is the true something, and everything else in relationship is nothing. This is the perspective, what's called Das Elyon, that he is the yesh, and everything else is ayin. That's Das Elyon, which is called the upper level of looking at things. And then there's our level of looking thing, bottom up, where we're a yesh, right? We feel ourselves to be something substantial. We are something, a yesh. And since we have no understanding into him, he's called the ayin. So we see these two things can be looked at in totally opposite way. Yesh and ayin. We say he brings yesh from ayin. And our job, the Rebbe has told us many times, is to take this yesh hanivra, this created yesh, and turn it inside out to reveal the ayin, the essence of God, which is within it. And in order that this yesh, this created yesh, which is created b'koyach ha'Ein Sof, which is created by the power of the Ein Sof, but becomes bal gvul, it becomes limited, and it becomes in the realm of midah, number. So nislabish orin said bekelim. That's the magic of the phrase of the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, becomes invested in the kelim. In other words, infinity becomes invested in finitude, which in our world, those things are paradoxical or opposite, but he is the one who creates it all, and therefore it's not paradoxical at all, as the Chachamim, the Kabbalists have said about God. He is the one who's Seivil HaFochim. He can carry opposites, because he is Yesh and Ayin. Yesh and Ayin together. He's something and nothing. And this is him, because I've said this once before, and I'll say it more than once before, I'll say it again. The big news about Hashem being Ein Sof, right, we call it without limit, is that he can limit himself. In other words, he is not limited in the sense that he can't limit himself. If he couldn't limit himself, he would be limited. So Ein Sof takes on a whole different meaning. It's not just going on forever and ever, but it includes the power to stop and limit as well. Because if it didn't, he would be limited. So he's the one who bears and carries opposites. That's the Ein Sof. And he manifests these 10 spheres, or these 10 kalim, the Yud spheres of Atzilus first, the 10 spheres of Atzilus, umisyakad b'soichem. And here's the most important thing. He is united within them. There is nothing besides him. Every single thing contains him, and yet he has singled out 613 things about which he says, there is my panemius ratzon. There is where I really, really want to be manifest. I'm hidden in everything, but I'm going to be manifest by you, taking these 613 things and using them in accordance with my will. And that's what I mean when I said I want a dwelling place in the lower world. Because there you will see, when you take the mitzvah, what happens when you take the mitzvah? Simply speaking, you attach yourself to God's will. And that has a nourishing effect on the soul, an illuminating effect of the soul. It brings the soul out of its gullus and exposes it, and makes peace in the olam katan, in the man, the human being, and in the world at large. And that's what he's after. That's called Mashiach and redemption. Mashiach and redemption are come about by us engaging with what he himself and he alone wants us to, which is the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. And there he is miyachad. He's miyachad in everything, but he's particularly focused on these. And there he is unified in a complete unity. Now here we're speaking, this language applies to the world of Atzilus. And we know that Atzilus is no work. The beings of Atzilus are created with a awareness of him. We have to work, and because we have to work, that work brings forth a power which brings forth an even more intense light and awareness of God than exists in the world of Atzilus. But in Atzilus, things are very nice up there. And Netzolim, the emanated things, don't feel separated at all. And there is invested the power to descend lower and lower and lower, Livre Behen, to create through them the powers that come down, the angels and the soul powers and the lights which come down from Atzilus. Val Yodim Berurim Baligvul. And through this condensation, what's the word I'm using? Condensation of light, more and more, he puts himself to the side, so to speak. He emanates the Kav, that singular beam, and then the Kav goes through what I loosely call a prism, and then manifests in many, many different kinds of light until you get infinite multiplicity. Or as he said, Brurim Balikvul, you get creatures, unlimited number of creatures, the tachlis, and without end, an infinite number of created things. And specifically, where does this multiplicity, particularly the multiplicity, where does it manifest itself in the lower worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya? That's today's talk. The lesson how nothing becomes something, or how the real something becomes nothing. All right. Anybody got anything to say? I mean, it's hard to follow that, all right? Okay, so we'll continue this story. This chapter 20 goes on for a while. See you tomorrow. Emir Hashem.
Thank you very much. Thank you.